Hi, and welcome to our panel today on what we can do to advance the climate agenda. A very broad topic, but we're going to get to some very specific answers here with Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, CEO and chairperson of the Global Environment Facility, and Kim Thomasin, executive vice president and head of investments in Quebec and stewardship program. Welcome to you both. And I think to get started here, I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourselves. Tell us a little bit about your work and how other people can learn from your successes in their work. Carlos, do you want to go ahead?
Oh, ladies first, please, Eric.
Oh, bonjour. So Kim Thomasin here at CDPQ. Lovely to meet you, and I look forward to the discussion. As indicated, I have the pleasure of leading the Quebec investment team and overseeing the work of our stewardship team, which includes, including in any of our investment decisions, all ESG components. So, j'ai bien hâte de vous en parler, et avec votre permission, je vais continuer la présentation en français, but I would turn it over now to Carlos.
Well, thank you, Kim, and thanks, Eric. My name is Carlos Manuel Rodriguez. I'm the CEO of the Global Environment Facility. This is the largest multilateral environmental fund. Was created 30 years ago to support developing countries and countries in transition, with their economies in transition, in implementing the multilateral environmental agreements. Climate change, biodiversity conservation, land degradation, fresh water, chemicals, and waste. We have provided more than $21 billion in grants to 171 developing countries, with around $120 billion in co-finance. I look forward to participate today in this event. I was the former Minister of Environment and Energy in Costa Rica. During the period that Costa Rica became zero emissions on the energy sector, electric sector, and land use, which are the two main sources of carbon emissions. So there's a very nice story that can be told from the Costa Rican perspective. Thanks, Eric.
Great. Kim, can you tell us a little bit more about your work?
Absolutely. Permettez-moi tout d'abord de dire quelques mots sur la CDPQ. La CDPQ a été créée en 1965. La CDPQ gère aujourd'hui près de 400 milliards de dollars canadiens pour nos déposants au Québec. Nos clients, nos déposants, ce sont 42 organismes publics et parapublics, principalement des régimes de retraite et d'assurance. Cette gestion-là de leurs actifs, on l'effectue dans une perspective de long terme. On investit dans toutes les classes d'actifs, les actifs liquides comme les marchés boursiers et les actifs le moins liquides comme en infrastructure, en immobilier et en placement privé. Aujourd'hui, la CDPQ, c'est un groupe d'investissement mondial. On possède des bureaux et des équipes dans 10 pays à l'international. On poursuit toujours notre double mandat, notre double mission qui est enchâssée dans la loi, celle de générer des rendements qui sont nécessaires pour nos déposants, les clients dont je vous parlais un peu plus précédemment, et de contribuer au développement économique du Québec. On vise toujours à participer à bâtir une économie dynamique et durable, puis notre expérience comme investisseur et notre leadership en matière ESG a forgé notre conviction que la performance et le progrès vont de pair. C'est pourquoi, on vise à investir un capital qu'on dit constructif. We call it constructive capital. Alors, peut-être quelques mots, avec votre permission, sur les résultats de notre première stratégie climatique qu'on avait annoncée en 2017. Alors, on travaille sur les questions ESG en investissement depuis plusieurs années. Ça fait plus de 20 ans. Je vous dirais que l'ESG fait partie de nos convictions et de nos valeurs. En 2017, on s'est activement engagé dans la lutte contre les changements climatiques. On a publié notre première stratégie climatique à ce moment-là, une stratégie qui nous a permis de nous placer parmi les pionniers sur la question du climat chez les investisseurs. Et on voulait une stratégie qui était ambitieuse, mais réalisable. Et on voulait la déployer, cette stratégie-là, de façon transparente en faisant une reddition de compte annuelle qui est publique. Alors, tous ces efforts-là ont été mis là, au niveau de la transparence. Et aussi, ce qu'on voulait, c'est très important pour nous, notre stratégie en matière climatique, elle devait couvrir l'ensemble de notre portefeuille. Pas seulement les marchés boursiers, mais tout aussi bien les actifs liquides qui liquident. C'est, à notre avis, la seule façon d'influencer l'ensemble de l'économie. Donc, chez nous, chaque décision d'investissement tient compte du facteur climatique, peu importe le montant, peu importe la classe d'actifs. Un investissement de 50 millions comme celui de 2 milliards va avoir la même analyse climatique, la même rigueur, évidemment. On soumet l'analyse de l'impact carbone des transactions aux divers comités d'investissement. Ce processus-là, ça nous permet de suivre en continu l'atteinte de nos cibles climatiques. Ça nous permet aussi d'identifier des nouvelles occasions d'investissement sobres en carbone. Au niveau des cibles, dès le début, en 2017, on avait fixé 2 cibles très importantes. On s'était donné comme objectif de réduire l'intensité carbone de notre portefeuille global de 25% en 8 ans, ce qui nous amenait à 2025. Le deuxième objectif, c'était qu'on s'était donné, la cible d'accroître nos investissements en actifs verts de 80% en 3 ans. Donc, d'ici 2020, qui est maintenant derrière nous. Et après 4 ans, je vous dirais qu'on est très, très fiers des résultats que nos équipes ont obtenus. Des résultats qui dépassent largement ceux qu'on s'était fixés. Alors, à la fin de 2020, on avait doublé nos investissements sobres en carbone par rapport à 2017. On a maintenant 36 milliards d'actifs verts en portefeuille, principalement dans les énergies renouvelables, les infrastructures et l'immobilier durable. Des exemples de ça, on a des installations en renouvelable dans une douzaine de pays à travers le monde. On investit dans le REM, ce projet de train léger électrique qui va atteindre 100 km à travers le Grand Montréal. Si on compte le réseau en construction puis celui qui est en phase de planification. On est partenaire d'Ad Énergie, le champion québécois des solutions de recharge. En ce qui concerne la réduction de notre empreinte carbone, en 2020, on avait réduit, notre intensité carbone de 38% par rapport à 2017, alors qu'on s'attendait ou qu'on s'était fixé comme objectif de faire 25%. Alors, ça, on en est très fiers. Pour y arriver, ce qu'on a fait, c'est qu'on a mis en place un système rigoureux de gestion de l'empreinte carbone de chaque portefeuille. Chaque portefeuille a un budget carbone. Nos gestionnaires tiennent compte de ces budgets carbone-là dans la planification annuelle. Ils doivent s'assurer du respect. On a développé des expertises de pointe dans le domaine au sein de nos équipes. Et on a aussi fait intéressant pour vous tous, lier la rémunération variable des équipes, toutes les équipes à la caisse, à l'atteinte de ces cibles climatiques-là. On est l'un des premiers investisseurs institutionnels mondiaux à l'avoir fait. C'est un message, à notre avis, qui est très fort et qui indique clairement notre direction. Puis on est convaincu que cette façon de faire a accéléré la collaboration puis l'alignement de chacune des équipes. À travers notre action, on veut aussi exercer un leadership fort comme investisseur. Les investisseurs, on le sait tous, ont un pouvoir d'action et d'influence important. On le reconnaît, money talk. Et avec les gouvernements et les entreprises, on peut faire avancer les choses. On a tous un rôle à jouer. C'est pourquoi, à la CDPQ, on participe à plusieurs groupes avec nos pairs pour faire avancer la question. La CDPQ est membre fondatrice de 2 initiatives internationales qui mènent des actions concrètes. La première, c'est le réseau de leadership d'investisseurs, RLI ou ILN Network. Ça regroupe 14 membres, c'est plus de 9 trilliards de dollars US réunis, où l'objectif est d'accélérer la collaboration, entre autres, sur les changements climatiques, spécifiquement en exigeant une meilleure divulgation des risques climatiques de la part des sociétés qu'on a en portefeuille collectivement. Et là-dessus, là, je vous inviterai à consulter les rapports qui ont été préparés puis rendus disponibles par nos experts collectifs là, d'ALN sur le site là, qui est www.leadershipnetwork.org. Beaucoup d'informations disponibles à cet égard-là. Le deuxième, qui est bien connu aussi, c'est le Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance, à laquelle on s'est joint dès le départ, qu'on a cofondé avec des partenaires. 42 membres, 6,6 trilliards de dollars américains. Ici, on travaille vers notre objectif commun d'avoir un portefeuille net zéro d'ici 2050. On travaille ensemble sur des cadres et des protocoles qui aident les entreprises et les investisseurs à construire de meilleures stratégies de transition. Alors, je vous ai parlé de ce qu'on a fait, ce qu'on fait présentement. Si on regarde notre première stratégie, on a obtenu des résultats importants. Nos équipes ont démontré qu'on pouvait avoir une contribution positive face aux défis climatiques et en même temps saisir des occasions d'investissement qui sont prometteuses. On a dépassé les cibles qu'on s'était fixées en 2017, puis on compte aujourd'hui parmi les grands investisseurs en actifs durables au monde et on veut continuer sur cette lancée-là, sur cette voie-là. Alors, on travaille sur notre nouvelle ambition. On veut prochainement présenter notre prochaine stratégie climatique, ce qui est celle qui va nous positionner et positionner l'organisation pour les années à venir. On a acquis une superbe expérience qui nous aide à voir le bon chemin à suivre. Évidemment, j'entrerai pas dans les détails aujourd'hui de cette nouvelle ambition, mais you'll have to stay tuned. Mais on compte à nouveau nous appuyer sur l'ambition, sur la rigueur, sur la transparence et l'innovation qui caractérisent nos équipes, parce que on le sait, le défi il est immense. On a vu les événements climatiques des derniers mois et ceux des dernières années nous démontrer l'urgence d'agir. Alors, on a la conviction que notre influence et que nos actions sont plus nécessaires que jamais. L'engagement, la collaboration, l'innovation vont être des grands atouts. Et en terminant, c'est l'affaire de tous, le climat. Cette crise climatique-là, elle se réglera pas malheureusement avec un vaccin. On doit toutes et tous y mettre du sien. Merci de votre attention.
Thank you. Thank you for your remarks and that overview of the work you've been doing, particularly in the last few years. I do want to shout out, reinforce one thing in particular, the website that you mentioned, investorleadershipnetwork.org. It really is. It's quite a useful network of information and best practices that anyone watching in the space might turn to. Certainly in our preparations for this discussion, I found it to be extremely useful. And .gef.org is the global environment facility that Carlos leads. And God, the scale of things to talk about is pretty overwhelming. And I think, Kim, you mentioned that in 2017 you issued a church and that you have an update to it. Can everyone hear me? I apologize if, okay, good. So my question is about the scale and the speed with which this conversation is progressing. I mean, in 2015, we had the Paris Agreement and its sort of twin goals for no more than 2 degrees with efforts to get to 1.5 degrees Celsius. 2018, we had the famous report that put everybody on the path toward net zero by 2050. And the events that you mentioned, Kim, as well. This conversation is moving. How do you steer an organization, and how do you make sure your practices are current in an environment where every 6 months to a year we have a new global target to meet?
Thank you. You're right. The scope and magnitude is sometimes mind-boggling or overwhelming, but nonetheless, I think to keep the focus and to work with our peers is something that we've seen be very efficient. The power of numbers when we work together, whether it's institutional investors like ILN I've mentioned previously and which you referred to, or whether with the other Canadian pension funds like the Maple 8 ESG pledge that was shared last year. I think those are key, and having constructive, open, and transparent dialogue with the portfolio companies where we can influence. I think that is key, and to keep the momentum, to continue the pace, and to push that agenda. We've seen when we launched the 2017 investment policy vis-a-vis climate change, something that we did not think would happen, but the unknown impact, which was a very positive one, is how the younger generation who were looking to apply for their first jobs in finance, some of the candidates told us that they would pick us because of this, because of our position on climate change. So the unforeseen result, which was very well welcomed, was how engaged the people were and how it distinguished us perhaps from other employers, and how people engage and care about this, and how the discussions at board level have advanced as well. That pace is very, very fast too, which is a great thing.
Carlos, how is the GEF, which, as you said, for 30 years has been involved in environmental projects around the world, funding and directing them? How are you dealing with the acceleration we're seeing of the climate conversation on every front?
Well, thank you, Eric, for this. And let me begin by addressing the issue of the scale from our own perspective, so I can contribute to give the big picture. Annually, total emissions account for around 50 billion tons a year. The GEF, the second largest climate fund in the planet, helps developing countries through many different initiatives to offset and avoid emissions. Our annual contribution is of around 375 million tons. So we contribute on an annual basis, being the second largest environmental fund or climate fund, with just 375 million tons out of a total of 50 billion tons that are being emitted by all sources from all countries on an annual basis. So the scale of the challenge is huge. And from our perspective at the GF, we're doing some major adjustments because for 30 years, we've been implementing the many different set of goals and targets at the conventional level. So one thing that it will help us amplify our impact is to do the integrated approach. We got 6 or 7 environmental conventions. Historically, we've been working and focusing on each one and providing fundings to do the innovative approaches or the piloting, even the jurisdictional approaches in many countries where we aim to improve policies, improve institutions and capacities. Now we're moving towards a more comprehensive, holistic approach where we don't work based on one specific convention rather than addressing them in a more integrated manner. Just to give you an example, nature conservation is 30% of the climate solution, and we've been addressing nature conservation just from the conventional biological diversity. as we integrate better the investments in biodiversity conservation with climate change, we will be using nature as a cost-effective way to mitigate and adapt to climate change. And here's probably, my country, Costa Rica, is a good example. Costa Rica has been able to double the size of the forest, go 100% renewable energy in the electric sector, at the same time that the economy tripled and the population doubled, meaning that, addressing climate change, loss of biodiversity is not a burden for growth and prosperity. On the contrary, it can be a good way by which you move from this unsustainable consumption and production pattern into a more circular economy with better policies, better institutions, understanding the market failure, and understanding the right policies and incentives that you need to create for the private sector. Private sector is 80%, 85% of our economy. They won't be an agent of change until governments are clear with the right policies. And those right policies are in theory, are very simple. We need to help do the shift in terms of the tax burden from taxpayers to polluters. Just one example. Those who provide us with a very positive land use should be rewarded for the carbon, water, biodiversity services. Dealing with that market failure is a major issue. So governments need to work intensively in leveling the economic playing field. So protecting nature and mitigating and adapting to climate change becomes extremely attractive to the individual as well as to the large corporation. We are not there yet. We're far from getting there. And this is not an easy path. It's not an easy work. And I'm really, really excited to hear Kim and what his sector is doing. But I strongly believe, coming from government, that we got a pending agenda from government in terms of leveling the economic playing field. And this is complex because there are losers and winners in this process, as everything else. Those who contribute with climate emissions to the climate should pay the cost of doing that. So the issue of carbon tax, the issue of pollution and tax, the new green tax reform, those elements should be up in the political agenda, and I see countries, pushing for that, but many others are far from that because of the very concrete economic recession product of the pandemic.
Well, and it's a critical time to be asking what policies may be coming down the pipe as we are, a month and a half away from the gathering in Glasgow of nations and involved in the UN climate process. It's a process that in many ways is pretty deeply arcane, and we don't need to focus on the details of the implementation, negotiation of the all the clauses of the Paris Agreement. But it is these COP events have always been a moment for everyone in the space to check in on where we are and what we need to do. So with a month or 6 weeks left before Glasgow, what is your advice to everyone watching about what is interesting, what is important, what can anyone do wherever they are to be a part of the conversation that will come to a head in November in Glasgow?
Well, thanks, Eric. And let me assist you in giving some additional elements to contribute in the complexity of dealing with multilateral agreements and the multilateralism. In these conventions, negotiations should be done on the principle of consensus. So everybody must agree not on the ideas, on the words of the many different texts. I don't know any society that takes political decisions or under consensus. And even in my family, when I propose where to go on the weekend, there is no consensus. So generate consensus on these very tough, difficult issues is not easy. That is why it has taken so much time. And sometimes we ask ourselves, why do we need consensus in these large multilateral events if 80 to 90% of emissions are generated by a handful of countries? On the other side, those are elements that add in the complexities of this negotiation. But on the other side, we haven't found any other better mechanism than multilateralism to solve these global issues. So here, 4 topics are key that we understand in COP26 that should give us a sense of a very successful event. One is a secure global net zero emissions by 2050. This is extremely important because we're still not all there yet, and we need to finalize the rules of the Paris Agreement, particularly on setting common time frames for the climate commitments, and strengthening transparency requirements, and for me, extremely important, agreeing on Article 6, which will give us the basic conditions for the carbon markets. The second topic, which is extremely important, is the topic of adaptation and resilience. We need to understand that the adaptation need is critical to protect people, and we can use nature as a cost-effective way to generate more resilience and more adaptation. Adaptation actions receive 1/4 of global climate funds, so we need to level up. We need to get up to 50% in climate mitigation, 50% in climate adaptation. We need to really understand how do we address the global climate finance gap at the global level, and we at the GF we will be working on countries at the domestic level, helping countries more narrow that gap. And narrowing that gap is a mixture of 3 things. One, more ODA for particularly less developed, very vulnerable countries. Second, mobilize domestic resources more efficient countries. Even the poorest of the poor countries, they invest in climate mitigation and climate adaptation, probably not in the most efficient way. So we will be helping them. And third, as important as the 2 previous ones, we need to stop investing in those activities that contribute to climate change. There's a lot of perverse incentives, wrong investment, public development banks investing in activities with a high carbon footprint, and just, of course, subsidies is an issue. This is the third important element in the COP, mobilize finance. And there's these big expectations that there will be clarity on how industrialized nations will mobilize the $100 billion. That will generate a lot of trust in the process. And the last, but not least element of the COP, which is extremely important to me, is collaborate to deliver. We need to collaborate to deliver all together at the same in the same direction. And this is not easy, as we see, political tendencies around nationalism that goes in the opposite direction to what we would like to see in terms of global collaboration for high delivery.
Thank you. Kim, do you have thoughts on how to understand what we're going to be seeing in Glasgow?
I was tempted, Eric, to ask you what you'd like to see after covering this for many years. But before you go, maybe I agree with you, Carlos. Secure and net zero emissions. I think the collaboration to deliver is, in our experience, so key and important that we all get together towards the same point. I'm very optimistic by nature. My friends say I'm terminally optimistic. So I very much look forward to seeing what's going to come out of COP26 and the commitment. But Eric, I'd be interested in your views as well.
Thank you. I think I asked at the beginning about how you cope with the bewildering speed of all these conversations, because it's something I struggle with. Just the speed of change at every level we've seen in the last certainly 5 years is 6 not entirely on topic, but 10, 15 years ago, what did we talk about? What did we cover? We talked about tech and devices and the internet and And the hottest new thing that gathered so much excitement was personal technology. And today, like, against all logic and reason, that excitement has somehow transferred into the energy sector and climate stuff. I mean, energy, just the most expensive, plotting, heavily regulated industry, is now the center of everyone's attention, I think appropriately so. So when it comes to the COP in Glasgow, I don't have any answers. That's why my job is to call people and ask questions. But I've always felt and observed that there's great value. There's great value in the COPs in their ability to anchor a conversation, to keep a conversation before everyone, and to remind everyone what the stakes are. And speaking of energy, you, Carlos, you mentioned very quickly a preference for nature-based solutions. I wondered, what among your projects in particular, it's just an interesting topic. There's a question from the audience about it. And Kim, is nature-based solutions on your radar as an investor, and how do you encourage companies to go after it?
On our radar, it is. This is something that we're currently looking at and seeing how we can educate ourselves, see what's been done, how it worked, what were the successes, what are the risks we should be aware of. So definitely something on our radar.
Carlos, it's bread and butter for the GEF, I imagine.
Well, it is. Nevertheless, we've been working a lot on the transportation sector, solid waste, agricultural sector. And let me just pause here a second, Eric, because the energy and transportation sector has always been, the big sector in this, climate change community. And based on what I have seen in my country and what I'm looking in many other countries, the transition in the energy sector is going to happen quicker than what we expected, with the benefit that it will be providing us. The big problem is the land use food system sector. That is going to be extremely challenging, and we're not putting it in the equation in terms of our resource mobilizations and policy development. I remember, 15 years ago, as a climate negotiator for Costa Rica, we were saying, IPCC is saying that land use change, deforestation, is the second most important source of carbon emissions. And we haven't had any, decisions or actions. And REDD+ came, reducing emission from forest deforestation, forest degradation. Everybody thought that by providing resources to developing countries to protect their forests because of the services they will be providing will be enough. And we were saying, no, this sector is more complicated than the energy sector, because in the energy sector, you got the technology, you got the resources, the cost of the transition is, becoming more and more attractive. Land use and the conflict on forest conservation, indigenous communities, livelihoods, food systems, and this irrational, inefficient consumption and production pattern will be extremely complicated. So I want to bring this issue because we need to address it as such. And this is something that is going to be, kind of a huge challenge. With regards to nature-based solutions, I'm extremely happy that we were able to overcome that silo situation that we had in terms of actions related to all the multilateral conventions that everybody's understanding the efficiencies in relation to the integrated approach. And investing in nature, it is high return, cost effective, and we see it in many countries. In Central America, a region that put a lot of attention and monitor regarding hurricanes, those countries with the highest cover, with the better restoration, of course, do much better after the large hurricane hits. So it has been proven in many times. So we are doubling our effort in mobilizing resources to developing countries. to increase their investment in nature-based solutions. They will be more resilient to climate change, and they will be more resilient to future pandemics and other kind of global challenge.
We have just under a minute left. What final words of advice do you have for people trying to keep up with what's going on and make the best decisions for themselves and their organizations?
I'll go. Have a plan, continue with the momentum, and don't be overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of what's out there.
We don't have a financial challenge. We don't have a technological challenge. We got a major political challenge. Let's understand that challenge and let's try to do the change within the system, inside the system. Otherwise, we won't be able to impact at the scale and at the speed that we need.
Well put. And I thank you both for your time. Make sure to read more about what the Montclair, I live in Montclair, the Montreal investment program is doing at, I wrote it down and I apologize, investorleadershipnetwork.org, the Global Environment Facility at thegef.org. And I'm Eric Rawson with Bloomberg Green, which is bloomberggreen.com. Thank you all very much for attending.